Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is immigration attorney Brad Bernstein. Brad, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, I'm excited for your expertise here because it was a big weekend. As we knew from the campaign trail, President Trump said if he was elected for a second term, immigration was going to be one of his top priorities. He vowed he was going to enact the Alien Enemies Act. He signed a proclamation this weekend invoking the act. We know it's an 18th century rule, and it's to deport migrants that the Trump administration has tied to a Venezuelan gang. A federal judge blocked the action on Saturday, but the press secretary confirmed that, quote, this weekend, at the president's direction, the Department of Homeland Security successfully arrested nearly 300 Tren de Aragua tourists, saving countless of American lives. From the standpoint of an immigration attorney, what sticks out to you? Can you first break down what exactly the Alien Enemies Act is?
Well, it's a law going back to 1798. Before there was even immigration law existed, before there was a Supreme Court that even came down with any rulings on immigration. And it was based on, because back then there was no CIA, there was no intelligence, there was no FBI, there was no even federal criminal law. So George Washington and the founding fathers, they had to decide, well, if we're at war against somebody, we don't know if, in the War of 1812 it was used, for example, we don't know in the War of 1812 if this person from Great Britain is on our side, on somebody else's side. There's no internet, there's no background checks on anybody. So we want the ability to deport them very quickly as a wartime authority. And it was used in the War of 1812, it was used in World War I, and the last time it was used was by President Truman in World War II. Most famously, the Japanese detention camps, as well as he used it all the way through 1951 to deport people without any hearings. And there was a Supreme Court decision that back in 1951, Letke, and what it said was that President Truman had the right to declare a war and to say when the war was ended. It's a political decision. It's not for the courts to get into that thicket to determine when war starts, when war ends. And as a result, this law, Alien Enemies Act, was a valid law, and he can use it to deport people when he wanted to.
So it's a law from the 18th century. It's only been invoked a few times in this nation. I want to read some language from the proclamation from President Trump over the weekend and get your response to it. He said this, quote, Tren de Aragua is a designated foreign terrorist organization with thousands of members, many of whom have unlawfully infiltrated the United States and are conducting irregular warfare and undertaking hostile actions against the United States. I'm stuck on the term irregular warfare. As an attorney, what do you think that means?
Well, under the Alien Enemies Act, you can invoke it if we're at war, and that would be a declaration by Congress, presumably, because the president can't declare war. It could be an invasion, or it could be a predatory invasion. And what really the difference between an invasion and a predatory invasion, to the best of anybody's knowledge, would be that invasion would be an army, and a predatory invasion, if you're thinking back to 1798, what would be a predatory invasion, because this is when it was written, would be more like a militia coming into the United States to attack. The issue that immigration lawyers and constitutional authorities have on all of this is, well, they've been here for a very long time already. When did this invasion actually start? Why is this invasion starting now? And, it's been going on for decades already. And number two, can you call a group that is not a government invading the United States of America? It's like a de facto group. It's not even unless you're going to say that this gang or drug cartel is actually being run by a legitimate government.
You weren't surprised by this because you actually posted a TikTok about this last week saying, here's exactly what this law is. President Trump could invoke this. As your expertise as an immigration attorney, do you think the Trump administration has firm legal ground to invoke this?
Well, it's really going to come down to the judges, because once this is all invoked, there's three possibilities. Congress can declare war, and then it's a non-issue anymore. They could say, you know what, we're at war against these Venezuelan gangs, we're at war against this Mexican cartel, and then it's a non-issue anymore. Congress could also change the law, and they could say, you know what, the Alien Enemies Act, it pertains to people who are here, who are either documented or undocumented, who are non-citizens, who are part of this gang. Nobody believes that Congress is going to get involved in this. So it really comes down to what does a judge say? Does the judge say that President Trump has a right to say when there is a war and who we're at war with? There is a separation of powers. Congress is supposed to be declaring wars, and presidents are supposed to be the head of the military. But we'll see what happens with the judges, because there are case law that says that judges don't want to get involved in political questions. And one of the political questions that was back in World War II that I mentioned before in that Supreme Court decision was that the Supreme Court said we're not going to get involved in determining when a war is ending. Now, that's a different question than determining are we even at war, because during World War II, it was a declared war by Congress, and the Supreme Court decision said, well, we're not going to decide when this war is over. That's a political decision. That's different than a constitutional issue of separation of powers. Congress is supposed to declare a war, and is supposed to declare a war against who we are at war with. And here we have a situation where Congress has been silent, and it's been the president who is not only declaring war, declaring who we're at war with, and it's against not even a nation, it's not even against perhaps even a group that's controlled by a nation. It's a de facto non-governmental organization that he's declaring we're at war with. The other big issue becomes, once the president has this authority, is given this authority, the question really becomes is, who's now going to determine, is this person a member of this group? Is this person not a member of this group? And the bigger issue even becomes, Americans say, yeah, we'll get rid of the drug cartels, get rid of the gangs, who needs them? But what happens to all the other people who an immigration and customs enforcement officer, without the review of a judge, without any judicial process, says, hey, you're part of a gang, you're getting deported, when the person may have nothing to do with the gang, just because of what they look like, just because of who, maybe the area they're living in, or their last name, or even where they were born.
I think that brings up a really good point. Do you think that this proclamation really is a slippery slope here? Because how do we know that all of those migrants who were deported were part of or affiliated with the Tren de Aragua gang? And do you think in the future, what is the classification, what is the characterization here to say someone's a gang member or not?
Well, there is none. It's going to be on a case-by-case basis, where somebody just says, you're part of a gang, you're getting deported. And that really goes to the fundamental issue of the U.S. Constitution and U.S. law, where everybody has their individual liberties, and everybody has a right to a hearing before a court as an individual person to determine whether or not they're part of a gang, whether or not they're part of a drug cartel, whether or not they are doing something against the U.S. government. And the biggest issue here is that is eliminated, those individual rights where you have a right to say, I have nothing to do with this. And instead, you have individual ICE officers. It's not Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not walking around the cities arresting people. These are individual immigration and customs enforcement officers who have been trained to some level, who knows how much, who are making life-altering decisions about individual people, if this law were to go through, and allowing them to be deported to very dangerous third world countries, jails, El Salvador, where I've never been in an El Salvador jail, but from when I read about it, it's not pleasant at all. Or even worse, getting deported back to Venezuela, where most likely all of these individuals will be persecuted by the Venezuelan government. So these are life-altering decisions about people's fundamental rights to life and liberty that are being determined by an immigration customs enforcement officer with very little training in this, without any oversight by a judge to have an individual hearing to determine if this person is even part of this gang.
There were questions, as you noted, about President Trump's potential overreach here, and a federal judge pretty much immediately on Saturday blocked this temporarily for 14 days. And as we know, Secretary of State as well as the press secretary said that some people were already deported, and Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt reportedly said this in a statement, quote, "The administration did not refuse to comply with a court order, and that, quote, the order, which had no lawful basis, was issued after terrorist TDA aliens had already been removed from U.S. territory." What do you make of that situation? The federal judge blocked it. People were still deported, but the Trump administration saying essentially, we didn't refuse to comply, but that's not even legal anyway.
Yeah, well, they're just making up their own rules as they go along. They're saying we're at war, we are declaring this, and as a result, a judge can't say we're not at war. But it's a really fundamental question. Are we at war? Who are we at war with? You know, is this a war? Immigrants coming into the United States? And nobody's questioning whether they are drug dealing, they're bad people. What the question really is does anybody have any individual rights anymore? Or are people all going to be rounded up as one large group and deported, similar to the one of the worst situations in U.S. immigration history, the Chinese Exclusion Act, where an entire nationality, entire country was barred from living in the U.S. or entering the United States just because they were Chinese. And we've had over 100 years of apologies because of that. And I would suspect that if this were to go into place 20 years from now, we're going to see more apologies against Venezuelans. But even more importantly, where is it going to go from Venezuelan drug dealers? Is it going to go to Mexicans? Is it going to go to Guatemalans? Is it going to go to people here who are undocumented? Is it going to are they going to say any immigrant who's ever been arrested in their life, even for a minor crime from 30 years ago, you know what? They're an enemy of the United States now. They're committing crimes in the U.S. They don't get a removal hearing either. Or is it just going to be all immigrants? I mean, where does it end?
I think a person who would be supporting this action would say something to the effect of, hey, they're a violent gang member. Hey, they already came into the country illegally. Do they get individual rights, considering they're not a citizen, considering they broke the law by entering the country illegally? As an attorney, what do you say to that?
Well, I say, I'm not arguing. Nobody wants to live in an unsafe country. I have children. I don't want my children to be sold drugs by somebody else. We're all in agreement. We want a safe country. We want bad people out. What we don't want is a situation where our individual rights are cut, literally at our knees, where people get grouped together as a collective punishment simply because they look something like a gang member, because they have skin color like a gang member, they have a tattoo like a gang member, without ever looking into determining whether they are good or bad, or they deserve to be here or not. Lots of people have been here for 20, 30 years. Maybe they have spouses. Maybe they have U.S. citizen spouses, children. Maybe they have sick children. Maybe they have sick grandmothers. Maybe the entire family is sick. Maybe they're the breadwinner of the family. Maybe they've never done anything wrong. None of this is taken into consideration. You just look the part and you're getting deported. And the United States was built on freedoms and individual rights and individual liberty, and that's all being cut away. And to me, there's a way that we can do both. There's a way that we can make America safe and at the same time not erode our liberties. And that is, there are judges and hearings, and these hearings can take very short periods of time, half a day, 3/4 of a day, a full day. Hire judges, hire trial attorneys, give everybody their right to a fair hearing. And then if it's determined that they're a member of a gang, they're selling drugs, they don't belong to be here, they have no right to be here, I'm all in favor. Get them out. I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with the violation of people's rights.
And you're essentially saying, hey, this is a slippery slope. Where does this end? It starts with these gang members. Who knows where it ends? As someone who deals with this every day, as an immigration attorney, what do you think is then missing from this conversation when it comes to immigration and when it comes to President Trump's immigration policies?
Well, I think what's missing is the fact that we are making the immigrant the boogeyman, that every immigrant in the United States is bad, and only people who are born in the United States are good, and everybody else is bad and should be out of the U.S., when in fact, immigrants have been the lifeline of so many different industries. For example, I would say half of the agricultural, I wouldn't say, I know for a fact, half of the agricultural workers in America are undocumented. If we were to deport all of those undocumented immigrants, mostly Latinos, but some from all over the world, and if President Trump, this law was going to go into effect, President Trump can go on all the farms and just say, you know what, you look like you're part of a Venezuelan gang. You're out of here. No hearing. Guess what? We're going to be eating Chips Ahoy because there will be no vegetables on our stands anymore. There will be no fruits on our stands. They're the ones who are giving the United States all of their fruits and vegetables. And without them, we have none. So we have to be very, so we have to be very careful on who we're saying is the boogeyman. Yes, there are bad apples everywhere. They're bad Americans. There's more bad Americans than there are bad immigrants. If you look at the percentages of Americans in jail versus the percentages of immigrants in jail. But yes, bad people don't belong to be here. Good people, I would believe, should be here as long as they are helping the United States, such as agricultural workers, as a good example.
This seems like, as of this weekend, with the judge blocking it, there's lawsuits. It seems like a legal mess right now. So what are you specifically looking out for next? Do you think the Alien Enemies Act sticks?
Well, I think it's really going to come down to, I was just having a conversation with one of my colleagues about it over the weekend, because what's going to happen is assuming the federal judiciary wants to get involved, which we're not 100% sure yet. We have this judge who put a stay on any removal for 14 days, and President Trump's press secretary said, "Oops, sorry, we did it anyway. What are you going to do about it?" And that's really what it comes down to, is the rule of law. Is President Trump actually going, and his administration, going to follow the rule of law? We have separation of powers, and if a federal judge says you can't do something, you have to comply with it. And here we have a situation where President Trump's administration has basically stuck their thumb in the judge's eye and said, we did it anyway. What are you going to do about it? And here we now have a constitutional, or potentially have a constitutional crisis, because the federal judges don't have a military, they don't have a police, they don't have a jail, so they can't go and do anything other than say, we hold you in contempt, and then make additional rulings. We hold you in contempt again. We hold you in contempt a third time and a fourth time. But eventually, those are just words and signatures on a piece of paper. Eventually, the only way that you want President Trump to follow, my belief, follow a federal judge, it's going to be public opinion. Because if public opinion says, Trump, you can get away with it, then he's going to get away with it. And we're going to ignore federal judges' rulings. And now we run into a situation where we don't even have a check on powers, the famous check on powers between, Congress makes the law, president enforces the law, and judges decide and interpret laws. Here we have presidents making law, executing law, and deciding law, and now we're what's left of our Constitution.
What do you think public opinion is on this specifically? Because in this election, the top two issues facing voters were the economy and they were immigration. So do you think that the public is for this, or do you think the majority of the public thinks, hey, this might be a bridge too far?
I think when it always comes to immigration, when you ask the public questions from 10,000 feet up, and you ask these questions, should drug dealers be deported? Do they deserve a hearing? No, drug dealers don't deserve a hearing. Get rid of them. Should gang members get a hearing? No, get rid of them. Should we keep, should illegal immigrants be able to get some form of amnesty and get their green cards? And I believe the last thing I saw was a majority said no, throw them all out of the country, except when you start talking about specifics and individuals and individual situations. And then people start saying, yeah, get rid of all the illegal immigrants or get rid of all the undocumented immigrants, except my friend Ron. My friend Ron, he's a good guy. I work with him. He's a good guy. He should be able to stay. But so when we talk about people as individuals and we put a face on a person rather than calling them the boogeyman, people change their minds very fast. And I think a situation where it's one thing to have Venezuelan gang members who are supposedly or allegedly gang members getting deported, where people may not have as much empathy for them. But once others start getting embroiled in all of this, which is absolutely going to happen, there's going to be people who get deported without a hearing, who left behind family, friends, jobs, homes, who have been here for decades. And when you start putting faces on people, that's when empathy starts happening. And I believe people generally have empathy, most people. So once it becomes a more empathetic issue, then get rid of the bad guy issue, that's when public opinion changes.
Brad Bernstein, this is really a situation that is going to continue to develop, continue to unfold. And as it does, I really hope you come back on and shed some of your expertise on it. Thank you so much. You're welcome back anytime.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.